When we talk about health, when we talk about sustainability, when we talk about workplace safety, what are we talking about? What are the issues that affect us as project professionals and also businesses involved? With me today is Nanis Kanana.
Thank you for having me. I'm Nanis Kanana, an occupational safety, compliance, and sustainability professional. I practice in East and West Africa. I'm really very passionate about helping businesses really ensure safety and sustainability of their projects and also operations. I'm the group HSES and sustainability manager at PowerGen Renewable Energy. The East Africa HIOSH consultant. I also wear other hats in the community or in the industry. Important to say I'm a member of Workplace Safety Professionals Association of Kenya. I really love collaborating with organizations and like-minded professionals to make a difference in the industry.
Thank you so much. Welcome the conversation, Nanis.
I'm excited about it.
Welcome the Mhandisi family. To welcome you to today's conversation again, we are going to talk about a proverb. So the proverb says, mpango sio matumizi. Again, mpango sio matumizi. What's your interpretation of this, Nanis?
Mpango sio matumizi. Plan is not action. Plan is not action. I think to me it sounds more of you can have good plans, but generally it doesn't translate to the actual results. I think that's what the proverb is.
Yeah. Good way to think about it. For me, actually, the proverb generally says, I mean, you can plan as much as you can, but if you don't actualize the plan, then there cannot get the results. Yes, so today we are really speaking about health, safety, and environment, together with social. And the expert is here, the expert is in the house. Nanis, what do we mean by when we say health? How does it really translate into the day-to-day activities in the industry?
Yeah, maybe to start us off, I'll explain what health and safety means. They sound like two big words, but for sure they are not. So in the context of a workplace, health and safety means generally health. We making sure that people's health is not affected. We don't get diseases from the work that people are doing at a certain workplace. Then safety, it's the absence of physical harm. So generally when we say health and safety at workplace, we just saying that we want to put in place measures to ensure that everyone who works in a certain workplace go home back safe. And that means they able to earn a living without jeopardizing their health, acquiring diseases, or even any being exposed to any injuries from the work they are doing at that workplace. So we're looking at it as a whole, not only what they're doing 8 to 5, but even in the process of even commuting to work. And things are really changing. When you talk about health and safety, it is wide. Before, mostly we would talk about the physical hazards at our workplace, maybe the machines the people are using, the environment, and maybe also the capacity or competency of the person. Right now, there are other aspects involved. For example, we're talking about aspect of mental health. This is not really like a physical hazard, but due to trends in the industry, that is another scope that we need to be checking. Because you can have at a workplace someone who maybe doesn't have any physical injury, but if their mental wellness is not in good shape, then you still have a gap. And actually, one of as much as it's a legal requirement to make sure to provide a health and safety workplace, a health and safe workplace for everyone, and it's also now a fundamental human right as declared by ILO. But in addition to that, what we tell businesses is a healthy worker, a safe working environment translates into a productive employee.
Wow. A safe environment, a safe worker, a safe environment translates into a safe
into a productive employee. Yeah.
Okay. Wisdom. Yeah, so the aspect that I think we've not touched on in that introduction is on the safety protocols. Would you just explain to us what that means, how we get to interact with these protocols, so that we don't really speak about laws per se? How then do we get into practicing this? What are the examples, for example, that the safety protocols are followed, or how do we interact with this on site?
Okay, they are different. The principles are generally the same, but if we don't specifically, we would maybe have to give an example of one specific kind of industry. I think for our discussion, let me, for example, choose construction. Construction kind of working environment. So when you talk about the safety protocols at such a work environment, I'm going to talk about three things: people, the environment, and the equipment that the people are using to execute the work. So for example, if we're talking about the equipment, when you say the equipment are safe, actually the requirement is to provide equipment that are safe for use. That means it's one thing to provide the tools and equipment to the employees, but it's totally all other game to make sure that they are safe for use. So are the equipment in good condition? Are they serviced? Do we have operation manuals? A lot of time I see companies really import equipment, for example, the cranes. But when they bring them to site, the operators they have on ground are not trained to use this equipment. That means there's a risk because of competency gap. So we need to make sure the operation manuals are there, but also need to take these people for training. So that is the bit about the equipment aspect of it. And actually also on equipment, I normally encourage I assume in most companies, purchasing of such equipment is done through supply chain. So when you're sourcing for this equipment or even considering the suppliers, there are certain aspects you need to consider. One of the key things you need to check is the machine must have an operation manual. But also for not only equip the machines, but also any other product you're procuring, there should be a data sheet. So these equipments, these manuals or write-ups usually have information on how to operate the equipment. In case of how do you identify major risk? For example, if it's a machine, if a certain alarm goes up, what does it mean? What are the major safety precautions in terms of operation of these machines? For example, the outriggers and stuff like that. The equipments are also usually installed with certain safety decals, like even you're able on the dashboard to determine the wind speed, which is also very important for such a lifting equipment. So you really need to make sure that it's part of the requirement you ask for when you're procuring. So I've talked about the equipment being in good condition, the capacity and competency of the operator. Are they competent? Have they been trained? Do they have the experience to do so? And are they certified to operate that equipment? Three things. One is the training. Then is after the training bit of it, are they certified? Is there a document showing that they have gone through this particular training? That's what we mean by certification or certified. Then the last one is experience. Are they experienced to use such a equipment? If those three are not observed, then there's a risk. Then I'm going to talk about now the environment itself where the work is being done. So there are certain risks. For example, if you're doing, for example, lifting in a construction site and it's very rainy or windy, then the environment is not conducive for such a task. Then there are those risks that now arise. Or you want to really do lifting on a ground that is very wet, then there's the risk of the equipment really sink in. So those are some of the things we look at when we talking about the environment, or even what other activities are going on within the same workstation. In some of the big construction sites, you find like there are like 20 contractors working at the same time. So you should also be able to check that kind of work interface, such that the work that one company is doing or going on at one group of workers is doing, there is not posing a risk for the another team that is working just adjacent. So those are some of the really aspects. For example, if there's a team working on the ground and you have another team working at height, so if the team working at height is, for example, doing hot works, then it jeopardizes the safety of the team working below. And actually, in safety, the practice is if there's a work going on at height, we should never have a team working below because of other risks like falling object and among other aspects, other hazards. The people themselves, everybody who is involved in a task, we should be able to make sure that they are briefed about the hazards of that particular job. They are aware of the risk. They are well trained. They are trained on the mitigation measures. And how the first step to make sure that this has been done is conducting a risk assessment. Now, a risk assessment is only as, if it's only on paper, it's only as good as when it is on paper. So once a risk assessment is conducted, it needs all people who are involved in that particular job need to be taken through the contents of that document. They know when I'm executing this task, what risk am I exposed to? What are the mitigation measures, or should I be able to do? Do I have all the equipment, even in terms of PPEs, for really mitigation or to be safe when executing such a task? So I think those are some of the things. Of course, even about people, we are talking about supervision. If the supervisor is not competent, then there's a risk because because then how the instruction that is given to the workers might not necessarily can lead to really lapses. And when you talk about safety, really it's a sensitive matter because when accidents happen, they are really unplanned and unanticipated. And the unfortunate bit is that when an accident occurs, we are not able to really reverse. I've witnessed examples like where lifting was going on and the sling carrying the holding the load gave in, maybe for one or two reasons. Probably it was not in good shape, in good condition, gave in, and the load collapsed and hit an employee. I've also observed, for example, when I was working in the manufacturing, I observed one employee. I remember the employee was very young. Actually, this was my first incident to witness, a major incident. The employee was just about 19 years and operating a machine. And what happened is in the process of cleaning that machine, he put his hand inside the machine. The machine was already running, and one of his fingers was cut off. You can imagine at that tender age, at 19 years, and you've lost one of the fingers. So it's really sad because when we look at a bigger picture on the implication of not mitigating risk at workplace and translating to the accident, it's not just about there was an LTA, that is a lost time injury, whereby someone is not able to resume work. There are a lot of things involved. For example, the health of this person is affected permanently. For instance, if it was a body part that was lost, or a certain organ in the body functionality has permanently been compromised, so you've affected the life of that person. We are not able to reverse it. The company will show sympathy. We will visit the person in hospital. We will compensate the person based on maybe the local regulations. In most of the countries, we have We have regulations on compensation. For example, in Kenya, we have what we call WIBA. So it's work injuries. It's a regulation for really that guides on compensation and how much should be compensated. That is Work Injuries Benefits Act. So it guides on in case you have an injury, what is the extent of the injury and how much should you be compensated in terms of percentages. And this is determined, these are percentages also based on what the person was earning monthly. But I always tell people that money cannot replace what has already been, cannot undo what has already, the harm that was already being done. We've had unfortunate incidents where people have lost lives. And it is really sad because we know, for example, we know for sure it's possible for us to put measures in place to ensure that everyone who comes to your workplace in the morning, they're able to go back to their family safe. It's always very sad when you have to call an employee's family to inform them that the person has encountered this or that injury or an accident or even a fatality. It changes their course forever.
When we are speaking about the question of money, and we realize also that sometimes contractors, sometimes businesses may decide that safety is costly. What would you say to such parties?
I think I've always encountered this. But we need to look at the bigger picture. In terms, I really encourage even organizations to go beyond compliance. Make sure your workplace is safe because of the moral obligation that you have as an employer, not even like the regulatory bit of it. The regulatory bit, every company is complying because they want to be in business, right? So if you're not compliant, then you have a problem with the regulators. But workplaces should really go beyond just compliance. And it's when you look at, yes, the truth is there's a cost to implementation of the safety requirements, whether it's PPEs, they cost money. When you're telling employers to conduct trainings, it costs money. When you're organizing for benchmarking, it costs money. When you're asking supply chain to really consider suppliers that meet certain standards, it's cost money. Most of the time, these suppliers you're really championing for, based on safety requirements, often might charge a little bit more. But in the long run, it makes financial sense. So it's really an aspect of really checking what are the risks that come with having gaps in the organization. What would that cost? And what is the company saving in the long run? Actually, I also encourage organizations to even check the cost of really the first aid cases they've had in the workplace, medical cases, LTIs, if you had any, also check that. If you've had to carry out any composition, track those costs. Over a period of even 1 year, you will realize really you would have saved so much compared to really the cost incurred around these particular incidents. And it's not only cost. We should not only look at it in terms of cost. There's also the reputation of the company. And also, what I've noticed is the type of really potential, what do you call it? The times we are living in, when people are considering jobs. Before, mostly it was just an aspect of working with a company that has a name, good payment, but it goes beyond that. Right now, it goes beyond that. The people are really looking at the culture of companies before they join an organization. Actually, even buying a product, customers or even clients now are going beyond just the really the brand and doing due diligence on their customers, or even the clients, to really check all these aspects. So apart from changing consumer, I would call it changing consumer demands, such that, for example, I don't know, Newton, what is your favorite coffee? I hope it's a local brand. But you find that even before people now, whichever, for example, brand of coffee they take, consumers have become more sensitive. They buying the story of that particular brand. So I would want to go to the names like of organizations, coffee or even tea companies that have had incidents. For example, a few years ago, we had one related to unfortunately sexual harassment of workers. Really, consumers buy stories. Currently, consumers are buying not only the brand, they're buying the story of the brand. So you find that certain consumers might stop buying that particular brand because of that particular incident. Even construction buildings, for example, I know of many construction companies in Kenya. So there's maybe been an incident where a building have collapsed for one reason or another, and people are really sensitive of such. So you find that even people decide to invest in a certain, maybe purchasing certain apartments or even a house, they really buying the story of that particular company, not only the unit or the house. And the same also applies now to job seekers. They are not only looking for an employer, they're buying the whole story of that organization. So beyond just the cost of accidents and how much cost it costs to implement safety protocols, employers should really be aware that times are changing, and job seekers are buying the whole story of the organization. It's not about the salary. Salary is good, but it's going beyond that. They want to know the culture, the whole story of the organization.
Let's transition into a question on where the gap is really, in terms of, if I'm the employer and I need to do more trainings on safety, where do you think the gap is? Because the employee is coming in from a position of, it looks like the employee is not aware of this safety issues. Where do you think the gap is, why I should retrain as an employer or train employees on safety issues?
Okay, so one thing I say is that an employer would hire and would hire based on certain competency, but also continuous. The company is growing, depending on the work that employer is doing for the company. Then there are also maybe new risks that are arising, depending on the services or the being offered by that particular organization. So as the work changes, or the nature of work changes, and or maybe the employee grows in that a particular organization, it is the responsibility of the company to make sure that these employees also equipped to deliver. Now, in terms of training, this is the competency bit of it, but there is also the legal, the regulatory requirements. For example, for safety trainings here in Kenya, you're required at a minimum to train your employees on first aid, fire safety, and also health and safety committee. You're required to have those three. That means at any time you're required in your organization to have first aiders, fire marshals, and health and safety committee to help champion for all these things we are talking about in the organization. So these the regulatory, so those are the statutory trainings, but also depending on the nature of work, the other trainings that employers are supposed to conduct. For example, working at height training, chemical safety training, machine safety training. So those are additional that are supposed to be conducted. Now, how do you identify? There's also conducting risk assessment. When you introduce also a new technology at workplace, you'd expect that your team is trained through this about this new technology you're introducing.
Now, I'm just thinking from a position of an employer including that costs because now it's a business cost for you to conduct all these trainings. So the expectation would have been that when the employee comes, the employee with the part of the things that's supposed to check includes, in part of the competence is supposed to check whether this employee is on safety issues, whether he has the competency on that or not. And then where the employee was trained. I'm assuming, for example, that the would-be employee would have gone through a school, and then now it is this school that will have infused these trainings.
Newton, what happens is that nearly most of the courses, especially maybe engineering, construction-related, environmental, there are elements of safety in the course. I'm speaking, for example, for the undergraduate courses, even in some of the diploma courses. So basically, for some of these courses, they're structured in terms of these occupational health and safety incorporated. But if we look at the obligation, who is an employer, what is his responsibility, even in the lens of the regulatory bit, and how what is really is the responsibility in terms of our health and safety, ensuring a health and safety place of work, a safe place of work for everyone. So it's the responsibility, legally it is the responsibility of the employer to provide a safe and healthy workplace. It doesn't say that the employee is going to come with his own skills and ensure the workplace is safe. It says it is the responsibility of the employer. So that means it's the employer to make sure all these things are put in place. It's also the responsibility of the employer to make sure the workers are aware of the risk they are exposed to when doing their job, and the mitigation measures are in place, and also allocate resources for implementation of these mitigation measures. So I just wanted to summarize it like that. It's good that you hire based on skills and someone is competent, but there is really continuous training that's supposed to be done. And it's really even the employees have obligations that maybe I might not speak about during this particular section. They have obligations in terms of really ensuring the workplace is safe, but ideally that's the responsibility of the employer to provide. The employer shall provide a safe work environment.
Someone said shall is not mandatory. Maybe my English is not correct, but anyway, away from that.
I think it's the discussions between shall and may, but I think shall means it's not otherwise. There is no otherwise. If we look at the long-term really benefits of making sure workplace is safe for everyone, and these protocols are implemented, it really outweighs the minimal costs is really involved. There's so many other aspects, benefits. Apart from preventing accidents, there is also the reputation of the company, as I talked about. There is really investability of the company. There's no one who wants this. I doubt there is any investor out there who wants to really partner with an organization that has really these kind of gaps. So that is really would be picked during due diligence. So for you to really make sure that your organization is really viable, even in terms of investment, you need to make sure that these things are in place even before a third high really comes to check.
So we've spoken about the responsibility based on, what sits on the employer side and also what sits on the employee side. But I wanted to follow up on now, how do we deal with employees who they don't want to be compliant with safety? How do we handle such a situation? Because you can imagine if an employee is unable to take up PPEs in a construction site, for instance, with the argument that, oh no, I can work without them. How do we handle that from a safety compliance point of view?
I think I've been worked in settings whereby the culture was really wanting, and also in companies that the culture is really good. What I would say is that there are so many aspects or angles to look at or lens for such a situation. So first I would ask, does the leadership or management, does the management show commitment in terms of safety? Are they always using their PPEs when they go to site? If they are on site and they observe a gap, how do they respond to it? Are they the first one to point it out? So what I know is that mostly the employees also check what the management is doing. They really observing, and it sets the tone for that particular company. Well, in terms of also enforcing it on site, I think also the policies needs to be very clear and should be taken, people should be taken through before they even engaged on site. That's why we have aspects like contractors and suppliers really onboarding. I believe it's at this point whereby we inform them of these requirements. Nowadays, we really even encouraging. Even you look at good companies who have very good reputation in terms of safety, you will find out when they are sending out their request for proposals, the HSES is part of it. So from the word go, anyone who wants to tender, they know this is really a requirement. It doesn't come after when the team is already on site. So the tone is really set, and it's part of the HSES becomes part of the pre-qualification for this kind of companies. That means they assess your ability to really comply to the requirements. The previous projects you have delivered, have you had any major incidents? How did you respond to them? So it shows really the commitment. So you are able to reduce some of these risks of having non-compliant service providers on site even before you give them the actual work. Now, when the team is already on site, of course, you have the induction sections, then check have the PPEs been provided to, have the teams been taken through the training, are they using all these other aspects like the risk assessment is being adhered to, the permits to work, are they being adhered to, and there is adequate supervision, the supervisors competent for that kind of a job. Now, and really you also need to monitor that this is going on site, and the company needs to have a good monitoring system. Don't only wait for the reports end of the day. That is really not enough, because reports can be very good on paper but does not really translate to this system being implemented on the ground and being adhered to. So you really need to go beyond just reports and actually on site being able to monitor that. It should also come with a lot of really responsibility even for the supervisors who directly work with the teams on site. But at the same time, I really encourage companies, we need to have non-compliance procedure. How do we handle non-compliance? Is it written? Well, it should not only be verbally, it should be written, and it should go even into the agreements of the service providers we work with. And also these what we would call consequence management for violations. So companies should also have that. I normally encourage companies to have in terms of categorize it in terms of really minor violations. You can have moderate violations and major violations. For example, if someone came to site when they were high on a substance, that is a major violation, right? So that is that's most of the time major violations lead to immediate dismissal. Moderate violations, someone can go on a suspension, disciplinary committee process. Minor violations can be a verbal warning, But of course, if repeated, then you'd also need to go through the entire process. But it's upon how the company want to structure the consequence matrix. So on this discussion currently, we might talk about it for 2 hours if I decided to go to detail of it. But the consequence management for the violations should be well laid out, so that you find a supervisor maybe supervising unsafe works. Maybe the permit work is not filled. Probably the operator of the crane didn't show up that particular day, and the supervisor decided we have to hit the deadline, and maybe appoint someone else from the team to operate the crane, this person maybe he knows to operate the crane, but he's not certified, he's not authorized, right? That is still a violation. So when you find some of these things happening, then also this is really supervision of unsafe works, and that supervisor also bears some responsibility. So how do you handle all that, so such that everyone knows what is their responsibility and what is the consequence for violating? And again, we don't want to turn it into really a policing, such that we are policing and you've been caught committing a crime and this is not a consequence. Also really build a system whereby we want to encourage people to comply, because it's really for their own good. We want everyone to go back to their families.
Thank you. And so I just want to follow up again on that. And it's interesting when we speak about safety and responsibilities and where the lines are. So if I am a new employee, let's say Nanis is the CEO of a company. What would you recommend? Now, this is the would-be employee doing due diligence on CEO Nanis Kanana's company. What are some of the things you would recommend that this employee checks, so that he also knows that, okay, this company also takes safety seriously? What are some of the pointers, 1 or 2 areas that the employee can look into to know that, okay, I'm getting into this company and this company values safety?
That's an important question. So I don't know if at this point I should make it general or maybe talk about some of the things that I check. But in general, some of the things I think that someone should check with the employers. Actually, we are living at times where the world is so much interconnected because of even internet, right? So at your comfort of your home, you're able to get so much information about our company. So go check on the social medias of this particular company, really what they do. If it's a certain department, check the profiles of these particular people. You could also check their posts on socials. I always say, like, this is just for me, but I think this is a very good indicator. If the company only posts about business and nothing on the welfare of the people, this is also, I think, in our language, you call it a red flag. Because then it means their focus is only on profit and not on maybe the responsibility of making welfare of their employees. So you really also need to check from the post. Yes, the core business, they operate to deliver a certain service and make profit, but it's also, as an employee, it goes beyond that. You really need to have activities in terms of making a positive impact on the community where they are operating. And these activities don't need to be very major, big, and having very high budget initiatives. No, they can be very cost effective, and also any programs they have on employee wellness. I think that's very important. Sometimes you could even really considering to join a company. Also check with people who have worked really there. Because as I said, now we are living in a world where most of this information is accessible online. Now, if you really considering a role, and this company has been advertising for the same role after 4 months, 3 months. I always ask myself, these people who have been employed, where did they go? What's the reason why they left? You really need to be aware of some of these issues. But I also encourage people to ask as many questions as possible during the interview process. If I look back in my at my career journey, I think I should have done better in terms of even selecting some of the organizations that I really worked with. But maybe it's because also some of this information was not
available then.
It was not available then, but now I know that it goes beyond really earning a salary. You need to be in a job that you're really enjoying what you're really doing. You growing, and so that even as you're growing, you're adding value to that particular company. You don't need to wake up and feel like you're being drained every time you show up at a workplace. So I think we really have a choice, and these some of the ways you can guide your decision on what kind of a workplace you're anticipating to join. It's okay to reject job offers. I tell people that it's okay to reject job offers if you believe the work environment is not going to be good for you. Especially in this current world where there are so many cases of mental issues, and so many people are affected, and we are quiet about it. So we really, the decision to join a certain workplace, because really, Newton, people spend so much time at workplace. I think most of the time, more than they even spend with their families. Some people spend like 8 to even 13 hours, 15 hours at their workplace. So this environment need to be really conducive. It's not only about making money. It's really need to be very conducive, serving the best interest of the employer, but also ensuring that the well-being of the employee is not compromised. That's why initially I said we are living at times where we need to look at employees as a whole being, such that apart from this employee physically, it looks okay, maybe doesn't suffering health-wise, it tells you he's not suffering from any illness. Maybe you can tell from the way they laugh at the workplace, the kind of interaction. But now you also need to start even thinking in terms of mental wellness of these particular employees. I'm happy about some campaigns that I've seen on really wellness of employee. For example, I got a friend of mine in the industry. She's called Esther Katiba. You could check some of his work, probably sometime our work. Maybe probably get to have a section with her sometime. She's really a champion. She's a legal and HR expert. She's really a champion of holistic employee. So a holistic person, that means a person is made up of so many aspects. So, of course, there's the emotional bit of it, there's the financial bit, there's the physical, which is mostly what we see, there's the mental bit of it. So it's a combination of so many things, and that's why it needs to be holistic. Manage the person as a whole, you see, so that they're able to be really productive.
Somehow it sounds more of HR work than it is about safety.
It's not. Let's not overburden the HR. Yes, we can. The HR can set the systems, but it's really a collaborative effort at the workplace. I think sometimes when we see some non-compliances or have a grievance, we need to hear them so that they are really addressed.
So now let's transition into how we manage the environment. All projects generally, especially in the construction industry, have something to do with the environment. How do we go about dealing with issues of biodiversity? How do we ensure that we are environmentally, what are the ways that you advocate for to ensure that we are meeting environmental compliance targets?
Okay, I think your question stems to projects' impacts on the environment. So what I would say is that there are so many angles and ways in which we can ensure this is done. First is even before a project starts, then the requirement is to conduct an environmental and social impact assessment or environmental and social management plan. So depending, there are international regulations that guide this. And also there are country regulations, local regulations. For example, we have IFC, E&S performance standards, but also they should be implemented in unison with the local regulations. These studies are conducted based on the scale of the project and the anticipated risk of the project. They determine the depth of the study. Now, during these studies, you are able to really assess the major environmental and social risk associated with these projects. Now, you have to look at the direct and indirect risk, and part of this assessment should also entail the biodiversity bit of it, whereby you're looking what are the environmental amenities around that project area. These are what we call a project site location, which is the actual area where the equipment will be laid, and this is what we call a project area of influence. That's the area of influence, that is the distance, can be guided by the local regulations. But I said we also need to consider now the international regulations to make sure it's as comprehensive as possible. So you need to look at, this enables you, by looking beyond the project site location, it helps you know what is the impact of this project on the nearby environment, or even the amenities that are within that particular region that are likely to be impacted by how the project is likely to impact these amenities, and also how can those amenities or environmental resources really impact the project. For example, if it's hydrological settings, maybe there's a river, there is streams, these are any surface water bodies, let me call them surface water bodies, whether permanent or natural. You need to know what is the impact of this project on such amenities, and also now looking at vice versa, how can such really environmental resources impact the project. For example, if you have a project near a dam, then you really need to have a plan even in terms of mitigation, as the distance from the dam to the equipment being observed in terms of regulatory guidelines. So in the event of maybe over flooding of really, or the dam breaks its banks, what is the likely impact on really the project? And also it doesn't only should not only, that's what I gave as an example, surface water bodies, that is just an example. Environmental is really wide. This is what we call climate risk assessment of really projects that we should also really look at. We want to know what is nowadays, due to climate change, we have events like extreme flooding, extreme weather events that could be flooding, excessive heat. You want to know all this, and or even strong winds, and how it affects the project. I'm reminded of one time. Now this relates to topography. So we working on a certain project in one region of Kenya, and it was a rainy season. But we never, I think from the assessment, we really didn't assess the probability of the risk of really flooding of that site. So it rained for like 2 hours, and all of a sudden water was flowing. The site got flooded. Water was flowing inside the site at a very high speed, and we had to be evacuated from that particular site. And the site was covered with water for about 2 weeks. So everyone had to be evacuated. And this was a workplace with about 800 people. So you can imagine how some of these environmental impacts, even related about climate, topography, if overlooked, can really impact a project. Well, later on, the drainage on site was improved because this was a big construction site, was really improved. But some of these things, impacts we are assessing before the project starts, really go a long way to even informing the design of really the projects. You can imagine having in place a project that cost millions of money, billions of money, and it is damaged because of extreme weather events like maybe flooding. So some of these issues look minor, but they can have a very really huge impact. So I normally look at it in terms of really complying to regulations, but also the really safeguarding the investment, and also making sure that the impacts of really the project on the environment are mitigated, so that years later we not have cases that the project is jeopardizing the public health of that particular community. So, for example, there's battery manufacturing company that was set. I don't want definitely to go to the details of the name of the company, but I remember a few years ago there was a battery manufacturing company that was set up in a certain community, and 6 years later there were health concerns that started rising, and this plant had to be shut down. So the impact is already being seen in the community in terms of health of these people living in this community, cancer, and so many other issues that arise then. But you can imagine at that point you are really not able to reverse the impact that has been caused in really that community. I know, like projects have there are very good things, positive impacts that come with a project. For example, jobs. If it's an energy project, provision of electricity in that particular area, and maybe across borders or even in the entire country. But we also need to look at what are the negative effects and how can they be mitigated, and should be done so in good time.
A couple of points that you've raised really before we really before transition into the social bit. I'm imagining a situation where I am a consumer of let me call it project services. Let's have an example of a developer, for instance. So a developer comes, construct houses, and then now people come and buy these houses. From a consumer point of view, how do I check that this developer took into place serious, was compliant with the environmental issues, so that I avoid cases where, some time back in the news we saw where people's houses were flooded to like floor number 3 or number 2. How do I ensure that I am not a victim of flooding before now I get into this house?
Yeah, that's an important point. Actually, a few months ago, so many people are affected, not only in Kenya but also in other regions of the world, Tanzania. Also, so there were flooding incidents in Nigeria where really people were affected. Some had to move permanently. Some were able to move back to their homes later. So in terms of really ensuring that guidelines are followed, I think it stems back to even the systems that our country has in terms of urban planning. And now the regulatory bodies, like in Kenya we have NEMA, that is the National Environmental Management Authority, that does also these approvals of impact assessment of some of this particular project. But really this land use planning, Newton. So there are places whereby the areas are really, there's high risk of flooding because of the rivers around there. And unfortunately, we've witnessed situations where buildings continue to be erected around these areas. And after every few years, maybe 5 years, 10 years, we have serious flooding issues. People lose property, people lose their lives, and it occurs again. I think it stems back to the systems we really have in place. But at the same time, it's possible now, even with the world we are living in, internet and all, to really do some background checks in terms of the location of where a project is, and is it in a flood-prone area, and what are the reasons that make it susceptible to really flooding, so that you're well informed. So it's you have to do a due diligence on your investment.
As the consumer of the services, like a layman, I may not know all these things. Oh, there's an approval body for EIA, NEMA. Is there a certificate that NEMA gives, or how do I check other than going to the internet and searching that place? Is there a way I can just is there something that I can use to tell that, okay, this developer has taken care of all these issues?
Okay, so for major projects, there is usually the impact assessment reports are usually made in public, are publicized. So your NEMA website, you'll be able to see some of that. Now, after conducting an environmental and social impact of assessment of a project, there is usually a EIA certificate. But now, Newton, we've witnessed projects still being licensed to go on, despite such risk that we're discussing right now. So I think really the systems in terms of the regulators should really be able to caution the consumers, but unfortunately that is not happening. So I might not be able to really fully respond what someone should do, but I know in terms of even personal initiative, talk to the people around that area. Do your research even online, but actually talk to the people around that. They'll tell you the truth. In Kenya, they say that if you want to know information quickly about a place, you ask the motorbike guys. They're going to tell you the truth. But generally, talk to the community around there. Most of these incidents, especially the flooding incidents, when they happen, there are people who move permanently, or there are people who lack the capacity in terms of resources to relocate and continue staying in the same residence in the hope that the incident will not happen again. But in the times we are living in with the climate change, some of these incidents recur after a couple of years. So it's better to really be safe.
So going into the social responsibility within the project, so could you just give us how to go about that, and how within a project to check on where the lines are in terms of what the responsibilities are for example, for the community, what responsibilities are there for the project company, and how do we as the involved parties ensure that at least we are compliant with all the regulations around social responsibility?
I would say for social bit of it stems, and I want to believe your question is more about the impact of the project on the community and how we engage in the community. So I think we should be able to reach out to the community before even we start the project, inform them of the intentionality to really implement the project in that particular area. It is the right of the community to know what are the risks of the project, what are really the benefits, and what is even does it mean to have this project in their locality. So it's their right to have really that information. How you engage the company, the community, there are different styles of doing it, but most often people go through the community elders, the CBOs, among other institutions that are already in existence in that particular community. This reminds me of land acquisition, So how is the land being acquired in that particular community for development of this particular project? One thing for sure, Newton, is after project construction phase, there will be operation phase. You will rely so much on this community to ensure that the project is effective, because you're not going to rely on really importing even manpower and bringing them to this particular community. So for the long term and sustainability of the project, and to minimize even the risk of community conflict, you need to engage the community at very initial stages. So by having these disclosures, also another important aspect is to know the perspective of the community in terms of how this project could benefit them. Let them make their proposals. If there's an extra mile you need to go for the benefit, then you need to also consider the proposals that they really put in place. Have what we call community liaison officers. So they will manage the relationship between the company and the community. Any issues that arise, then they're supposed to be discussed in good time, so that they do not really escalate, right? So if there's a conflict, then the project is also delayed, right? And it doesn't really, we're not optimizing the benefits of this particular project. So you need to discuss with the community in good time and keep that discussion really ongoing. This encouragement that as much as maybe a project is very technical, look at what opportunities can be taken up by the local people within the project site area. You also need to consult with different groups within the community. For example, what we'd call the special groups, like the women, what would be their interests, what are their proposals, look at the children, and such aspects. They will really have very good ideas on how, in their own lens, they think the project could be beneficial to them. For example, if you're in, like currently I'm in the renewable energy sector. So these women have very good ideas, even in terms of productive energy use. So you really need to listen and incorporate that into the project for the sustainability bit of it, so that they're able to own the project and feel that they are part of it and they are benefiting from it. There's an important aspect of land acquisition. I cannot emphasize enough on this. So make sure if composition is necessary, make sure that it is done. And necessary means you have to look at it from a holistic point. People physically displaced, like you have to relocate people from where they are currently, and it should be voluntarily. It should not be coerced. So you have to tell them why they need to move and discuss with the community and be able to compensate them for their physical displacement. This is what we call economical displacement. For example, these people are doing, in that piece of land, they were doing farming. And now you want to put in place another structure for your project in that area. For example, it's a water treatment plant, right? So you need to compensate them, because now this was a source of their livelihood, and that has now really changed. Also, in terms of you don't want to distract the social systems of the community. For example, if it was churches that were really on that piece of land, mosque, you need to be aware of that and even be able to work with them to provide the alternatives. So the project you're taking to the community should not, if this displacement, should not resort to displacement. And if anyone is really physically, they have to move out of that place economically or even temporarily, they have to be compensated for it, and make sure that it is done voluntarily. This has to be documented. witnessed that in some companies, this communication is usually verbal, but it's very important it is really documented between the tenant, the owners of the property owners, and the company. So I think those are some of the issues you really need to work on to ensure that the long-term sustainability of the project within the community. When the project is operational, at least have a stakeholders engagement plan. So what this stakeholders engagement plan entails is, who are the key stakeholders in this particular project? There's the community, there's the regulators. I list all of them down. What are their requirements and what role do they play in this particular project, and what is the frequency within which you're going to really engage them, because then you'll be able to get, if there's any issues, you're able to pick them in good time, address them, and if they have feedback on how we can really improve or even improve efficiency of these projects during the operational phase, then we also able to get those kind of ideas.
Going back to this person that is called community liaison. In the Kenyan setup, generally, or even in the African setup, we know that these liaison persons are in most cases politicians. And a project can take up to 50 years, the useful life of the project, 30, 20 in the renewable energy space, for example. We are looking at about 25 years, 20. In situations where this politician becomes mischievous, of course, the intention of the company is to ensure that the person that is displaced is compensated adequately. So what happens when this person realizes that, oh no, I was supposed to be compensated X, now I have X minus Y, I have been displaced? How now does the project company now get itself out of such a situation?
Okay, maybe also just to make it clear, the liaison person is not necessarily a politician. They have to be someone you're employing on this project specifically to handle the issues between the community and the company. Now, in terms of the risk that you've talked about, whereby compensation is not made to the companies despite the arrangement that the company has made, maybe for one reason or another, I normally encourage, for example, in the workplaces I've been, have as many avenues as possible so that you're able to pick some of these issues. For example, if we have what we call open hall meetings, whereby you meet the community members, and I encourage them to speak up if they have any issues. Those are some of the forums you can really pick up some of these issues. But they have to really be arrested in good time. You have to get to know, to be aware of them in good time, because that would then be a very serious violation.
So now, Nanis, we've spoken much about responsibilities with the from the employer side, the employee side, issues to do with social responsibility and project impact on the environment, and also social requirements. But what happens really when we are to talk about emergency preparedness? What would you say are the protocols to be observed so that we are well prepared in cases of emergency?
I think I would first want to start by explaining what is an emergency. So an emergency is an unplanned event that takes place, and it has potential to cause a level of harm. I don't know if I need to put it in Swahili. Jambo ambalo limetendeka na inaweza dhuru watu ama mazingira. Sio jambo ambalo tulikuwa tunalitarajia. So that is an emergency. So it's an unexpected event that takes place and can cause very high level of harm. And for all emergencies, we need to have a plan. And that is why we talk of emergency preparedness and response plan. for you to have an emergency preparedness and response plan, you need to identify what are the key risks that can be or emergencies that can be anticipated at your workplace or the environment within which you're developing the emergency response plan for. So, for example, this can be a fire incident, it can be floods, it can be oil spillage events. It can be, for example, if you're working in a high-risk environment, if there's multiple accidents that have taken place, how are you going to respond to that? If it's a major injury that requires specialized medical attention, that means can't be taken care of on site as a first aid case, you need to evacuate the person to hospital. Do you have a plan for that? So we are looking at all these situations, and then looking at what is the plan, what would we be required to do in case these events really happened. For example, even if another example is security incident, it can also be as major as for instance, a few years ago, we had the incident at Westgate. So I don't know how much you are prepared to respond to such an incident. So an emergency, we look at these unexpected situations. What is the risk of occurring? For example, a terrorist attack. You have to evacuate people from a building. So these events, if they happen, how would we respond to them? Do we have the skill set that would be required? Do we have the facilities that would be required? Do we have the resources that would be required? And who would help coordinate? And if we, for example, need external help, then who would be the key institutions or the people? So we are looking at it from a holistic point. There are those emergencies that workplaces can handle, can manage internally, and there are others that you would need that third party. For example, if it's a major security incident, if it's a major fire occurrence, then you have to contact the fire brigade. So you need to look at it holistically. It's a major accident. Probably you would need, if the organization doesn't own ambulance, you need ambulances. You would need to have a prior arrangement with hospital so that they are able to help you respond immediately. So that's really what an emergency entails, and an emergency response plan. So you make, for example, if it's a site, in case of flooding, what will you do? Now that I'm in energy industry, for an energized site, what you do in case of flooding incident? Because now you're not only looking at the people, evacuating the people from that site, you're also looking at even really safeguarding the equipment. So in the event of an emergency, we are looking at saving the lives of people, and also making sure that we respond immediately to reduce the damage that could be caused on really even in terms of the equipment. For example, I want to give an example most people can relate with, fire incidents. I'm sure anyone listening to me has maybe witnessed a fire, either within their environment, or even on social media, or even read about it, or at a minimum watched on the TV. So fire is really one of the events that has potential to cause severe damage. It can result to loss of life, loss of property, and within a few minutes, just an hour, our whole investment is gone. So, for example, in case of a fire, you need to have measures in place to make sure that you need to make sure that you have fire safety equipment or firefighting equipment in place. We're talking about not only fire extinguishers, but even hose reels and hydrants, among others, and make sure they are tested and they are functional. Now, it's one thing to have these equipments in place, and it's another one to make sure that the team is trained. You have people who are trained to use them, because the first responders in case of an emergency should be the team at the workplace, right? So you need to have people who know how to use these equipments, and that is why we even encourage to have fire marshals who are trained, and that part of that training entails how to use some of these equipments. Then you need to have first aiders, so that they able to rescue, to make sure that they preserve life. Anyone who is injured, they able to administer first aid. In Swahili we call it huduma ya kwanza. So the really the first to help before this patient gets to the hospital. Have an arrangement with the hospital. I would call them emergency hospitals, arrangement with one to be your emergency hospital, such that in case of such an incident, probably you contact them, they're able to send an ambulance to your workplace, or even when you get there, they are able to respond to your employees as soon as possible, immediately, and other administrative processes can follow later. Then even in terms of really recovery, really Newton for major incidents, past even managing the situation, you also need to talk incidents. Of course, major incidents can bring a trauma at workplace. For example, a situation where you witnessed an accident that multiple people died. There was a major fire incident. People your colleagues really got affected in this fire incident. This is the mental torture bit of it, and you have to go through a phase where you have providing therapy to this kind of an employees. That is now post. There are other things that you need to be aware of in terms of even the obligation, regulatory bit of it, how you make notification. I think what organizations often forget is that you need to have a plan in place on how to handle stakeholders. For example, if it's a fire incident, it should be reported to, for example, it should be reported to the Department of Occupational Health and Safety, or to the Directorate of Occupational Health and Safety, depending on the country, regulation. Also the fire department of a certain county. And even the police, because of investigations. Among other stakeholders, it can even be a company's investors. So you have to put in place a communication. Part of your emergency plan should include the communication bit of it. Who is going to communicate it to the internal stakeholders, who are often the employees, the external stakeholders? How will you map the external stakeholders to report to? Who will handle that communication? And after how long, within what period of time should that communication be made? It's really very important. It should not be undermined, because you should avoid a situation whereby even the media, how is the company going to address the media? Who is going to really talk to the media? So that should be very clear. I think you've seen an incident whereby maybe these security lapse, or an incident in a certain country, in a certain workplace. And when the media team arrives, or the employees, or everyone who was there want to really give their side of the story, I think that should also be managed. It's not like they don't have the liberty to speak, but anyone there should be a designated person, designated people who are able to release that information to the general public about what happened and what the company is currently doing about it.
So what role, again, do we see technology playing in this, in the issues of HSES?
Well, we are looking at a very interesting times, and really that is one of the major trends in terms of technology. For example, I'm going to talk about AI. Whereby a risk assessment can now be made through AI. Before you have to visit a workplace, take around, consult people, the various stakeholders, go through machine manuals for you to know the risk. And now AI is playing part of these roles, even in terms of really risk assessment and other functions. But at the same time, there's very resourceful information, which is absolutely good. But at the same time, we need to make sure that how applicable is this information generated through these technologies. How is it applicable to certain regions or your workplace? So I think one of the major risks we're going to face is really managing integration of technologies such as AI and the human intervention bit of it. I think that is part of the things we really need to manage, so that we make sure that as much as we introduce in technology, we really get in information that is applicable. We really need to be cautious of that. Something else I love about technology that I've really observed is how it's really been incorporated even in terms of identifying a risk in good time and being able to even help us manage or even reduce the risk. Before, during lifting activities, we have, maybe you're doing a lifting operations, you need so many people. You need a crane operator, you need a rigger. A rigger is the one who is like the signaler, giving the sign directions to the operator on the movement or to the lifting exercise. You need maybe also a banksman. You need you need maybe also someone to hold the rope or the guiding rope for the load when it's being lifted, because when the load is lifted, then it is swing, so you need someone to direct the load. So it's an exercise that would take so many people, and all these people, there are risks really involved in a lifting exercise. But when you look at introduction of technology, even robots are being used for some of this equipment. That means we are really minimizing lifting exercise that would be done by 10 people. Now it can only be done by 2 people. So we minimizing the risk exposure of having people around during some of this exercise. The other aspect to really look at is technology really taking up jobs that could be really be done by people. But from the safety perspective, that's a really positive impact. In transport safety, I've also really been happy to witness some of the changes that are coming with technology. For example, you're able to configure your trucks such that you've installed programs such that they're able to alert the drivers if they're speeding. They can alert the drivers when the drivers are fatigued. Maybe they are blinking a lot. They can alert the drivers. For example, if the driver is trying to multitask, maybe drinking something and driving at the same time. Now this technology to sense that the driver's both hands are not on the wheel and it's a risk, and that information can be sent. The truck is programmed in such a way that it's verbally can communicate to the driver that you're fatigued, take a break, and the same information is sent to the back-end office. So you're able at the comfort of your office to monitor a driver who is in another country and know this driver is maybe feeling sleepy or is maybe using their phone when they're driving or eating when they're driving. So you're able to monitor all these activities. So those are some of the benefits of technology. I think another one that I recently saw sometime last year is configuration of the truck such that every truck has alcohol blow. So if you blow and you're high on alcohol, the truck cannot start. So some of this configuration have really helped even in terms of implementing safety bit of it. But I've also talked about some of the risks that we're observing. And I think the best thing for the HSES professionals can do is make sure that they really also keeping up with technology, so that we're able to incorporate the positive benefits that come with integrating the technology into our work. But again, it should not really reduce or replace what you're actually doing, because the two of them have to go hand in hand. That's why I talked about I gave an example of the risk assessment. So if your risk assessment is AI generated, it's going to look very good on paper, but does it really reflect the technology, the equipment, and the ideal local situation of that particular workplace?
Looks like we've also touched on the aspect of future trends, because I wanted us to also speak something to it. What other than the technological advancements, what are these things that you're seeing going forward on the HES space that employers, employees, and practitioners should be looking out for?
I think I would want to point us to a report produced by IOSH in collaboration with ARAP. As I mentioned, I'm the IOSH East Africa consultant. So this report talks about the future of work and the risk and the opportunities. And it's a very interesting one. So it looks at several things. I think I'm going to highlight just 2 or 3. But it's a very comprehensive one that helps a professional look at really into the future, and even employees, so that we able to really make sure we are developing a holistic program for our workplace. One of it is climate change. So as we're talking about climate change, extreme weather events, for example, now when you're doing risk assessment, you also need to have that in mind. And what controls will you put in place? For example, if your employees are working in areas where there is maybe extremely warm temperatures, then what mitigations are you putting in place? So that also should be part of the programs you have integrated into your workplace. If it is flooding, I already spoke about it. So those are some of the things that we need to really look at. Also want to talk about the demographic changes. We are now observing, previously I think we've had the middle group, mostly aged people in the workplace. I think right now it's changing to really young people and the older generation. And I think it's maybe mostly the middle age are opting for gig work. Not sure why, but I think we observing the report state that there's mostly the younger group and the elderly group. And we need to now start structuring programs in the workplace based on the characteristics of this group of people. For example, the Gen Z, the programs, how we handle this group of people is not how we would maybe handle the millennials. These are a team of people that prefer flexible work environments. So we need to look at the risk that they are exposed to compared to then how the elderly people are more prone to such risk. For example, the older person maybe they are more prone to risk like trip and fall hazards at the workplace. The younger people are maybe prone. The other risk for the younger people would be like maybe the training bit of it. They are more curious. So those are some, and the more curious someone is, and depending on the context, on the environment where they are working on, the other risk they are really exposed to. So we really need to look at it. For example, if the older people, then you have to think about programs like even managing comorbidities. And for younger people, it would be a different aspect altogether, because comorbidities are mostly found among the older than the younger people. So the whole aspect, and even the kind of even insurance programs we have would need to change. Maybe younger people would opt for programs whereby the insurance even covers fitness activities, gym activities. So we really need to look at what risk this group of people exposed to compared to really the other one. Another aspect is gig work, the rise of gig work. What in Kenyan language, what does it mean? Say that's all. No, I think it means the temporary work that people carry out from time to time. That is where you're not a permanent employee of a workplace. You're just with them for a certain scope, and that is it. So that is really gig work. You are called upon to provide a certain service, and that's it. That means you're not a permanent employee of this particular company. You maybe offer that service on consultancy basis, something like that. So how does that connect to health and safety? Formally, if for formal work environment, or what I would call the traditional now, whereby we have permanent staff, is that there's maybe an insurance program for such full-time employees. There is training that is provided to them. There's work injuries benefits insurance for them. But for gig work service providers, that is not the case. You don't even provide them with PPEs. You ask them, it's part, their job, their scope of work entails that they have to come with some of these equipments. So it's relatively different. Now, ideally, if you look at most policies in the organization, they are mostly still designed on the full-time employee, taking care of the full-time employee. If you look at the regulations in most countries, they're still designed to cater for the full-time employee, the employer, and the employee. But now gig work doesn't fall under that, right? So while these provisions and even the regulations and the policies their company has doesn't look at safeguarding such an employee, this is where the world is moving to. So those are some of the trends, and we need to open now our minds to looking at all such kind of risk. I think the last one I would want to talk about is the changes in terms of now OSH profession. Who is now a competent OSH professional, or health and safety, environmental and social professional. Some would call it different terms based on the organization and region of the world. Who is a competent person? So the report just encourages people professionals to be open to take up to further learning, so that they really exposed to changing work environments and even be prepared for the future, because the question is how fit are we for the future? Now that the systems, the policies are still designed to cover what has been there, but we are acknowledging that things are changing because of changing technology, change in consumer preferences. Like I told you, now even employees, that is job seekers or even clients, are buying a story of the company. We talked about the technological advancement. We've talked about change, climate change, the demographic shifts in the workplace. So for sure, things are changing. The world is changing. The trends are very clear. So how fit are we for the future?
Yeah, it's a good point actually to end the conversation at that point. There's more to speak about, especially on the issues of what you've mentioned about the future. And that's the last question on the report. Is this report public? Is it something that non-OSH members can access?
Yes, report is public. It's on HIOSH socials, or I'll be able to share it. But even if you go on HIOSH LinkedIn, and even on their page, that report is available. But I'm still happy to share it. I would encourage everyone to really go through it. It's a very interesting one.
Of course, in the links in the descriptions, we will also include the report. Thank you, Nanis. Been a good conversation. Until next time, let's keep preaching the gospel of good practices in the engineering field. Thank you.
Thank you.